we will now turn to our guest, Brenda Barton, who is the country director for the Philippines, who is here to brief you on the situation in the Philippines in the aftermath of Typhoon Odette. Ms. Barton, are you on?
I think I am. Can you hear me okay?
We hear you just fine. That's great.
Very good. Thank you. Well, it's really a pleasure to be with you all today. It is a little bit late my time. It's 1:30 in the morning, and that is the time difference. But I'm really happy to speak to you today following two really important events that happened. One was that today we issued the revised and scaled up humanitarian country team needs and priorities document. And this is in support of Super Typhoon Odette, or Rai, which I think you'll all remember struck on the 16th of December. And there was an appeal that was released on the 24th of December, just 2 weeks afterward. So today we released that, and we just held a member state briefing in New York a couple of hours ago with our humanitarian coordinator, Gustavo Gonzalez, and the foreign secretary, Teddy Locsin, and others. And we were all just really underlying the urgent and growing needs that we're seeing still coming out from that situation, from that really terrible typhoon. I think you may recall that there was a 6-month appeal that had been issued, 107 million. This has now been revised upward to 169 million, just 7 weeks following the typhoon. And so far, 51 million has been received. So you can see we still have a long way to go. And really, what's happened is that in this typhoon, because it hit such a vast area, the area as large as Austria, it made 9 landfalls within 2 days. So the extent of the damage, sort of surprisingly still coming out. We're still getting reports of more houses being damaged, more agricultural land being destroyed. And, indeed, there was 11 out of 17 of the country's regions that had been hit. The good news, of course, was during Typhoon Haiyan, which there's often been comparisons, there were 6,000 deaths. The death toll today is about 400. And it really is credit to the fact that there was a massive pre-evacuation of some 800,000 people. And so, I think it is important to acknowledge the learning that has taken place from countries like the Philippines, which has suffered so much in the past. But still, there are really great needs that are required. There's some 16 million people that are living in really severely affected areas, and still, thousands displaced from their homes. 1.7 million houses have been either damaged or destroyed. And the needs of the really most vulnerable people has gone up from about 550,000 to about 840. So, as usual, we're looking at needs that are shelter is really number one. Food comes after that, water, sanitation. I went to one of the affected areas just very close after the typhoon had hit, called Surigao City. And I have to say, I've been working for WP for 30 years. I've worked a lot in Africa, a lot in crisis zones, and I had really never seen anything like that. I mean, it was really an image of sort of a combination between a typhoon and tornado, and things just literally being ripped up from the ground and twisted. And it takes so long for a country to recover from that, and for the communities. WFP, we're of course looking for immediate food assistance. We asked originally for 25 million to help with food and logistics and telecoms, and now our needs have also gone up by about another 10 million. So we've got 12 million so far, and we are concerned, I think, as humanitarians, being asked to respond to the needs of the country, that there are so many other urgent needs. We sit here, we see Afghanistan, and many other urgent needs around us, but we still have to, of course, really urge for the assistance in the Philippines, because there are just so many people that were already really chronically malnourished in this country. 1 in 3 children are stunted. And in some of the areas that have been affected, we had food insecurity of something like 53%. And that was pre-COVID. We had 2 years, like many countries, but 2 years of harsh COVID lockdowns, which has really devastated the economy. And it's pushed people to the edge. They don't have the incomes that they had before. They don't have the remittances from the Filipino workers abroad. And so people are very much, and children especially, living on the edge. And there's been, of course, a lot of damage to the agricultural sector. Some 10 million hectares of crops have been destroyed, 500,000 farming and fishing communities. and we're still seeing major power outages. I mean, the power poles had just been, really just cut in two. And so most places are actually relying on generators and then relying on fuel, which is, of course, very, very expensive. Some people are going like 2 days to kind of go and, 2 hours away to go and just charge their phone every 2 days so they can have connectivity. And they're walking, to neighboring areas where they might have a generator to do that. And of course, this is happening amidst the pandemic, which is really a calamity within a crisis. We're seeing it, of course, amongst communities that are being affected, people living in close quarters and evacuation centers. And of course, even our own humanitarian workers. I had 5 emergency experts come in from abroad, and all 5 of them have gone down with COVID. And so many of us are struggling, as well as the government, to have sufficient staff to respond to the crisis. And the weather has also not been cooperating. I mean, we had the typhoon, but there still is rains that have been affecting many areas, disrupting roads, having still many landslides. Some of the islands we have to reach, we have to take boats and ferries over, and some days we can't go because of the rain. And of course, we're looking toward the next typhoon season, which will come not so far away now in June. And with La Nina, we're expecting, that, of course, in a country like the Philippines that gets some 20 typhoons a year, we have to be prepared for that. So people are living still very much in the open and also under the hot sun. They're looking for tarps to get also protection from that. But amidst all the bad news I've given, there is good news. Innovation, as we know, often emerges out of disruption. And during the 2013 typhoon Haiyan, there was again a broad recognition that emergency telecoms, like we also saw recently in Tonga, is the first thing to go down. So the government with WP had invested in some really innovative mobile emergency telecoms units that for this emergency, the very first time they were used, because they just arrived from Dubai a short while ago, they were deployed and they were there on the ground ahead of the typhoon, and they were able to start transmitting really critical information about the extent of the damage. That was within 24 hours. And again, in most crises, it takes days. And I'm happy to tell you more about that. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. We'll now turn the floor over for questions. Edie.
Thank you very much, Brenda. Edith Lederer from the Associated Press on behalf of the United Nations Correspondents Association. Thank you for doing this briefing. You said that the UN's received, I believe, $51 million. How much is needed? And could you tell us why this typhoon ranks above every other typhoon, since the Philippines, as you said, gets about 20 typhoons a year and is very used to this?
Thank you, Edie. Thank you. So the new need is now $169 million. So that's up from 107. And before this new appeal, 51 million had been received. So you can see it's just moving, the gap forward. I actually have some interesting statistics, so I'm happy you asked that question about the climate. I mean, one of the things that is staggering to me is that the Philippines, being one of the most vulnerable areas, has had 317 extreme weather events in the last 20 years. And in fact, this Category 5 storm, it was the 3rd Category 5 typhoon to make landfall in the Philippines in the last 2 years. And what my climate experts are telling us is that the tropical storms and typhoons are becoming more frequent and more devastating. And, that's really I think we're seeing all these extreme climate events. And so it's not so much that there are going to be more of them, but they're going to be getting stronger, faster, and more destructive. And this particular typhoon was not in the normal typhoon path that we're used to. So it hit more south than what was normal. So many of the people living in that area had never experienced a typhoon of that magnitude.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. And any further questions in the room? let me go to the chat. And if any of you wish to ask questions virtually from online, please indicate it now, and then you can have the floor. Actually, James.
James Bays, Al Jazeera. So just, I mean, to state the obvious, really, how much of a wake-up call is this to world leaders and whatever on the wider issue of climate change? Just the example of what you are seeing.
I mean, you know, it's something that, again, we discuss as experts. We can't attribute an individual weather event such as this one to climate change, but we are seeing that these tropical storms, as I said, are coming at an intensity that's more frequent and more devastating. And of course, we had, you know, the COP26 last year. We were very much hoping through that and through other big forums that there would be notable change in terms of, you know, really the attention that needs to be given to these extreme events. And it really means preparing for them. It's not a matter of if they're going to come, it's a matter of when. So we've been working with the UN community here also on some initiatives that are called like anticipatory action. So trying to put some funding toward what we really would literally anticipate a typhoon coming and release the funds earlier into the community before actually the typhoon hits, in order that they can safeguard their houses, they can use the money to mitigate against the typhoon or the natural disaster. So there is really, I think, a lot of thinking that's going into how to deal with this increasing you know, velocity of typhoons and other natural events.
Okay. I think that is it for questions. So I would like to thank our guest, Brenda Barton. Thanks very much for your informative briefing. And also, especially thank you for making yourself available at what must be fairly late in the evening in the Philippines. So thanks very much. And I hope you can have a nice, restful rest of your evening.
Thank you. It's my pleasure. Thank
Great.
you.
Thanks very much. And I'll now turn the floor over to the spokeswoman for the President of the General Assembly, Paulina Kubiak.